The best known part of Henry V is a speech that the king gives right before the Battle of Agincourt. And Henry V, the king, wants to inspire his troops before this great battle. It's great English, it makes for a great read, it makes for an inspirational part of the play if you go see the play. And probably the best known line is what's in white there, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." In history, in American history, in the history of other countries, of course, you have moments when leaders want to inspire their troops, just as Henry V wants to inspire his troops. And one example that comes to my mind is the U.S. General Patton, who's with forces in Europe in 1944. And unlike Henry V, Patton's speech is pretty salty and is not aimed at sort of your general American audience. It's aimed at his own soldiers, and so the language is pretty rough. Just as Henry V inspires his troops with great eloquence, George Patton inspires his troops with rough, tough language, but it's language that does endear him to the troops. Now, if you want to make these speeches family friendly, you have to do some editing, and we'll do that here. But this little bit comes from his speech of May 31st, 1944, his address to his troops. Now, I want you to remember that no blank, so no guy, ever won a war by dying for his country. You won it by making the other poor dumb guy die for his country, right? And it's actually, a pretty good point expressed in pretty rough terms. Certainly it's memorable. We look at the first part of the excerpt here from Patton's speech of June 5th, 1944, the day before the D-Day invasion in the Second World War. And Patton says, "Men, this stuff that some sources sling around about America wanting out of this war, not wanting to fight, is a crock of stuff, right? Americans love to fight traditionally. All real Americans love the sting and clash of battle." We can go on and read that speech, and the language is very different from Henry V, but in their different ways, they are inspiring. There's that phrase that Henry offers, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers," right? Getting at this idea of the unity, the sense of camaraderie that can form among combat veterans. And certainly that is true. And the patch that I have pictured here comes from a medevac outfit that served in Vietnam. That is, these helicopter pilots are going in and getting the wounded off the field and getting them to medical facilities so they can survive. And I've talked to a number of veterans who were with the 498th medical operation there in Vietnam. And still, more than 5 decades later, they meet every year. They have annual reunions. They speak of this unit in high regard. They speak of the leadership of the unit with a sense of high regard. And there is this sense of being a band of brothers, of those who had a common mission, a common purpose. They risked their lives to do it. Some of their comrades were lost in battle. And so that line there from Henry V's speech to his troops, "We band of brothers," that has stuck, and it does get at something of the camaraderie that can develop. Now, there's another part of the speech that I find a little less convincing, and this is when Henry seems to be appealing to his soldiers to fight well because they're going to, remember this battle, right? "Then he will strip his sleeve," that is, the soldier who was here, in the future will strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, "These wounds I had on Crispin's Day," right? "Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot. But he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day." As you move through life, you'll forget a lot of things, but you'll never forget what you did here at Agincourt, right, in France, as we're fighting this battle. And this, I have to say, doesn't quite ring true, because even though I've spoken with many combat veterans who do remember war with a certain longing, they miss the intensity of it, they miss the clarity of it, I honestly have not heard anything along the line of sort of old-fashioned war stories, of some guy, doing what Henry V says here, pulling up a sleeve and saying, well, here's a scar I got at such and such place. That I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but in more than 20 years of interviewing combat vets, I haven't had that experience. So this part of the speech I find a little less persuasive. What's more common is what we find in war memoirs like Company H by Sam Watkins, who near the end of the memoir looks back now and sort of does a review of the whole thing. He says, I feel the flush and vigor of manhood. I see and hear our fire-eating stump orators tell of the right of secession and disunion. That is, these political speakers who are saying the Southern states have a right to secede from the Union and, whipping people into a state of enthusiasm for conflict. I see the fine banners waving. I hear the shout and charge, the boom of artillery, the rattle of small arms. And oh, my friends, I see another scene. So that first part is, that's kind of the glory of war, right? The booming artillery and the banners waving and the enthusiastic speeches, those fire-eating stump orators delivering speeches, who knows, maybe even quoting from Henry V, right? But then Watkins remembers something else, another scene. I see broken homes and broken hearts. I see war in all its desolation. That ultimately, there isn't anything glorious about war. We see something similar in E.B. Sledge's With the Old Breed. He was a Marine who served in the Pacific fighting the Japanese during the Second World War. He says, we received the news with quiet disbelief, coupled with an indescribable sense of relief. The news being the end of the war in the Pacific because the United States had dropped a couple atomic bombs on Japan, and Japan, thoroughly defeated, decides to surrender. So here this combat veteran with his fellow combat veterans, they hear the news. And he says they take in the news with an indescribable sense of relief. But then notice what he doesn't go on to describe. He does not go on to describe a celebration. There will be plenty of those, but not here. We thought the Japanese would never surrender. Sitting in stunned silence, we remembered our dead. So many dead, so many maimed. So many bright futures consigned to the ashes of the past. So many dreams lost in the madness that had engulfed us, right? So what's interesting is that Sam Watkins is on the losing side. E.B. Sledge is on the winning side. And yet they feel the same. So I'm a little skeptical of Henry V, who says, we're going to look back and, remember our fighting with a sort of a sense of longing for that. I mean, there is that, as I've said, sort of the intensity of battle. There is something that's alluring. But this idea of, showing your scars and telling old war stories in that way, I'm not sure about that. This cartoon actually makes the point. It's a famous cartoon from the Second World War. And the caption says, fresh, spirited American troops, flushed with victory, are bringing in thousands of hungry, ragged, battle-weary prisoners, right? So you've got the caption. But then you actually look at the image, and they all look exhausted, right? They all look dirty. They all look beaten down. And this is one of the interesting things, I'm speaking now especially of reading war memoirs. You read war memoirs from the victorious side, you read war memoirs from the defeated side, and what's striking is how often they feel the same. So there is that inspiration in Henry V's speech, and certainly we have inspirational speeches from military leaders to their men, and we have the examples of Patton, right? And certainly that part of the speech that gets at the camaraderie that can be formed among combatants, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, certainly that does ring true. The kind of casual scar showing and, war storytelling of that, I'm a little more skeptical, because it does turn out that even if there is a certain longing for the intensity and for the focus of that world of war, combat veterans, under normal circumstances, would still not wish that experience on others that they love.